This is going to finish up the notes on the executive branch. The general election for the president will have the primary in May here in Indiana, and the primaries will last from January to June. That's what we're going to discuss in the next chapter, but what you do need to know when the general election is. So everyone, every 4 years, votes for the president on the same day, which is the Tuesday following the first Monday in November of every even year. Inauguration Day, we've talked about the 20th Amendment. Inauguration used to be in March, and it's been pushed back to January, so we have a shorter lame duck period. And there is the oath that every president of the United States has taken. But the meaning of what the office of the president has changed over the years. The Founding Fathers really opposed an all-powerful head of state. Remember, we're coming out of King George III. We want to make sure that we don't have a king or anything that looks like a king in that period of time under the Articles of Confederation where we didn't have an executive at all. So we realized once again that that was a problem. We need someone to be able to enforce the law. So they do create under the Constitution a president. But this office was of great honor and dignity, but it had very little power. Once again, the presidency is not mentioned until Article 2, so we know that the Founding Fathers felt that the legislative branch was most important, and then the presidency came second. The president, despite what a lot of people think today, is not all powerful. They are limited by the checks and balances created under 1 of the Constitution. So the president has become the leader of our country. Their words and deeds affect the course of history throughout the world. This has turned into an office that was, like I said, primarily of great honor and dignity with little power, to be, some say, and you'll hear this if you listen to a description of the president, the most powerful person in the world. The cabinet. One of the most important parts of the executive branch is the cabinet. It is not provided for in the Constitution. There's nowhere in Article 2 that it's talked about. There wasn't an act of Congress that created the cabinet, but it was developed by George Washington as he would assemble the department heads. Today, there are 15 executive departments, and their primary purpose is to advise the president on matters of great importance, and each one of those departments specializes in a particular area, and we'll look at those here in a moment. 1789, George Washington's cabinet. There were only 4 positions: Secretary of Foreign Affairs, which today we would call Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson. Secretary of War would be Henry Knox. Fort Knox is a facility you should be familiar with. Secretary of Treasury was Alexander Hamilton, and then the Attorney General was Edmund Randolph. Current cabinet. I don't expect you to know all the people, but these are the current executive department heads here. The Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Defense, the Attorney General, who is in part the Justice Department. Anything legal that needs to go on, that takes place in the Attorney General's office. Secretary of the Interior, we'll look at that. Agriculture, Commerce, Labor, Health and Human Services. Kathleen Sebelius, if you've been watching the news at all, she was the Secretary of Health and Human Services. She had a great deal to do with the implementation of Obamacare. A lot of people are blaming her because of all the glitches and things like that. This past week, she did resign from that position. Secretary of Education, Housing and Urban Development, Transportation, Energy, Veterans Affairs, and the most recent cabinet position added is Homeland Security. So these are in the order, and make sure that you understand this because this is important for when we look at the line of succession. This is the order in which the office itself was established. So the Secretary of Homeland Security was the most recent secretary position or cabinet position that was added, and that was a result of 9/11. Presidential leaders, I'm not going to really say much about them right now, but there are really throughout history 5 presidents who have definitely increased the power of this office, and you're going to have a little project where you're going to have to look into some of this. So Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and I guess there are 6. There were only 5, but I added Teddy Roosevelt. And then obviously Franklin Roosevelt with the New Deal during the Great Depression. I'm just talking about some specific duties and powers of the president. The Constitution says the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years. When the Constitution was written, it did not limit them to the number of terms that they could run. But George Washington ran for 2 terms, and he said he would not run for a 3rd term. Article 2 of the Constitution deals with the executive branch, and there are 4 sections. It outlines how the president shall be elected and paid, and we'll talk about the election after we take this test. That'll be the next thing we talk about, is the specific process on how we elect a president, what his pay and how that can be changed, who shall succeed him if he is unable to serve out his term. And although it appears that the president has unlimited powers, and a lot of people would like to blame Barack Obama for everything, that is far from true. In Article 2, it says that the president is commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy. It also gives him the power to make treaties, and with a treaty, he has to have approval by 2/3 of the Senate. An executive agreement is also something that the president, or power the president has, but it is different from a treaty. It is where he makes an agreement with another head of another country. And the difference between a treaty and an executive agreement is the executive agreement does not need approval by the Senate. So make sure you understand. Treaties are agreements with other countries that require the Senate's approval, and it is 2/3. And an executive agreement is if our president decides for some commerce or something not near as important or rising to the level of the need of a treaty, where those two just get together, they make some sort of agreement, and it does not require the Senate's approval. Our president appoints ambassadors to other countries, Supreme Court justices, all federal judges, and officials. And it was ruled in the 1920s that since the president had the power to appoint, he also had the power to remove, and that is with anyone that he appoints except for federal judges. In the Constitution, a federal judge says it serves for life. So whenever the president appoints someone, he has to get the advice and consent of the Senate, which means he has to have a majority of backing of the Senate. In the Constitution, it also says that he is required to address Congress on the State of the Union. This is where he recommends legislation. So this is kind of a legislative power that he has. He goes there and he sets out what he would like Congress to do for the next year. And then the next thing he does is he submits a proposal for a budget. This is just a proposal. Congress, and specifically the House of Representatives, holds the purse string. So it is the House that actually, the president can say, I would like to do this. But if the House of Representatives and then in turn the Senate does not approve this budget, these things don't get paid for. He is responsible to execute laws, and he does this through what's called an executive order. Congress just writes the law. How it's going to be enforced is the responsibility of the president, and he does that by issuing these executive orders. And once again, we will look closer at some of those. He also receives foreign ambassadors and ministers. He is the chief diplomat. We know that. So he has the power of recognition, recognizing other countries, but he also has the power to take that recognition away. And that's what you see happen when we get ready to enter into war, or if we have some issues with other countries. Or there are countries that we actually don't recognize as states, so we don't, or as legitimate countries, so we do not recognize their ambassadors, and we don't have them here in the country. He has veto power, and we've talked about that. That is a check on Congress, but then Congress has the power to override his presidential veto with 2/3 vote. His judicial powers. He has the power to pardon. A pardon is a forgiveness of a crime. If you accept a pardon, if the president pardons you, you must accept that. You can deny it. If you accept it, you are admitting that you are guilty of that crime. But in getting the pardon, you don't have to serve any sentence for that. He can commute a sentence, which means lessen a sentence. Sometimes you'll see this if someone is on been sentenced to the death penalty, and for whatever reason the president thinks we should not have that, or that person shouldn't be put to death, then he can commute or lessen the sentence and put those people in for life in prison. And the president can grant a reprieve, which is a postponement of a punishment. Sometimes you will see this with stays of execution. Someone is getting ready to be executed and some new information comes to light. He can grant a reprieve, which means we're going to postpone that. Let's look at the evidence and then we can go on from there. Military powers. The president is the commander-in-chief. This guarantees that the people will have control of the army through elected civilians. We don't have a government that is controlled by the military, and that's very important. These military powers are shared with Congress because Congress actually has the power to declare war, but the president does have limited powers to commit troops without the consent of Congress. The War Powers Act, which you'll watch and do an activity with, is a law that was created by Congress that actually limited the president's powers, and there's a constant argument because he is commander-in-chief, is this constitutional? Since he is outlined as the commander-in-chief, should he be able to make any decisions in terms of committing troops? And he is the political party leader. He is the leader of his party. A lot of times he uses what's called a patronage power, and this is where he appoints members of his own party to government posts. That's why it's so important to gain control of the White House, because he appoints so many people, especially the judges who are serving for life, and he is going to commit people who are from his own party.